Hello, I'm Dawn Durham, and welcome to PaTTANpod. In talking about school improvement, we need to have conversations around increasing graduation rates. Here in Pennsylvania, we have several middle schools partnering with PaTTAN to see this happen. We refer to it as P2G, or Path to Graduation. Joining PaTTANpod today is a PaTTAN educational consultant, Karen Deery, dedicated to school improvement across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Hi, Karen. Thanks for joining PaTTANpod.
Hi, Dawn. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
I want to just make sure that our listeners understand we're not talking about two separate things. School improvement over here, path to graduation over here. They're not independent of each other. So on that note, can you share some commonalities between school improvement and this P2G or path to graduation work we're engaged in?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. That's a great question. So school improvement, as we know, is focused on looking at and improving outcomes for all students as any initiative that we're working within. So P2G fits right into that because both of these initiatives overlap with so many of the other initiatives within our system. So they both address things like graduation rates, decreasing dropout rates for students. They both look at increasing attendance and student performance for kids. And the other thing that they both look at is ensuring that our students are college and career ready when they do leave school. We're also looking for the opportunities to build capacity, right, to sustain these effective changes that people and schools are making in supporting these students. And they both address the conditions and the strategies that ensure equitable opportunities for all of our students. And they do this by bringing together a broad group of stakeholders at the state level, at the local level, even looking at bringing on not just our teachers and our educators, but our students and their families who all share a common vision for improving those outcomes for students.
There's a couple of things there you said that I just want to circle back to and highlight because I think it's important for our listeners to hear that again. This is really about outcomes for all students, all of our students, not just a particular subgroup or not just a particular grade band, but all of our students realizing and actualizing success in school. And you had said being, college and career ready, building capacity, decreasing dropout rates, increasing graduation rates. And I just want to highlight here, and you and I have had this conversation before, this is really about an overlapping of several initiatives. We're talking about equity. We're talking about behavior. There's such an overlapping piece that we're not talking about silos here. And I think that's an important point to point out. So thanks for doing that. I appreciate that. Now, let me jump to, if I have a school that's designated in school improvement, we've been recognized and we need to go through the process of a school improvement plan. How can P2G support these efforts?
Wow. So P2G, there's so much involved in the offerings that we have through P2G. This is a state personnel development grant that has been provided through the Office of Special Education Programs. So we're able to provide, again, as a system, opportunities for school teams to come together and use really validated teaming processes and protocols to come up with plans for students for improving these outcomes for students. So the focus is not just on outcomes for students, but also for the teachers. Again, as I stated, because this is a personnel development grant, we're looking at building and increasing those skills and knowledge base of our educational professionals in supporting primarily through P2G our students with disabilities, but specifically it drills down at an even more concise level to address those needs for our students who are identified with emotional disturbance and emotional support needs. So in doing this, we have several layers that we're building. In addition to looking at outcomes for students and teachers, we're also developing skills of internal and external coaches so that within the system, we can strengthen their skills to support each other at their own local level so that their practices that they are learning can be sustained over time. And so that we have this cascading model of release where PaTTAN and the intermediate unit and the local school level building coach all work together in the first year. And then in the second year of implementation, our PaTTAN support can begin to fade and we can turn over, again, that level of capacity to our intermediate unit external coaches. And then as they work even more with the building level internal coach, in that third year, it's our hope and our vision that the internal coach has the skills they need to be able to support that school-based team in, again, bringing in these evidence-based interventions and strategies that can be used to support this targeted group of students. And then another piece that we have is we bring in the family perspective. So as part of this broad group of stakeholders that we convene on a monthly basis, we also want to hear the voice of the families, and we want to make sure that we are addressing those most important sort of ideas and topics and challenges that might come in, delivering this instruction and these interventions to the students. When we get together on a monthly basis, we look at data systems and we're looking at relevant teaming processes that we can really analyze what the challenges are so that we can choose the appropriate interventions and apply those effectively and with fidelity so that we can, again, achieve the best outcomes that we can ever hope for these children. Some of those strategies that we use that you might hear us talk about are, we have instructional strategies that we bring in. So the University of Kansas has come up with a strategic instruction model. And within this model, we have instructional supports and routines that address things like vocabulary development and just unit organizers and graphic organizers that give a nice picture for a student to just wrap their head around what's coming up in a unit. From the University of Minnesota, we have adopted a program called Check and Connect, in which we we look at attendance, we look at behavior, we look at course performance, and we work with students directly to help them see how they're progressing and what kind of celebrations and successes they're having. And then also to help them action plan around goals that they might have for improving their own performance. And then the third piece that we have is that piece that addresses the transition and that being more college and career ready. So we have partnered with Transition Discoveries from George Washington University that helps kids create a plan for that, again, that post-school sort of transition into either post-secondary education or employment opportunities. All of this is done through the support of administrators. We have an administrators professional learning community where they get together and just talk about, again, how do we strengthen these entire systems and as a way to support better outcomes for kids.
Karen, you talked about this cascading model and this coaching, which really builds back to what you talked about before about building capacity, about these outcomes needing to be sustainable, not just for our students, but for our families as well. And I think that's something that we really do need to focus on. The family perspective you had mentioned, which we know family engagement is crucial in the success of a student, no matter the age. And I'm glad we brought that up. But then we can't go without mentioning the data. We can't go without mentioning that effective interventions are selected and monitored through the use of data, and those data-informed decisions are just critical. So that's something that our listeners do need to hear and have pointed out. So thank you again for that. One more thing, if we can just quickly talk about this. If a school is working through the cycle of improvement, what are some triggers that might indicate their needs are a good match to P2G?
Oh, I can give you a couple of indicators, Dawn, that would be, schools might want to pay attention to and consider that they might want to investigate P2G. One thing that we haven't talked about is the fact that P2G is really targeted toward middle schools. So if there's a middle school who has been designated for school improvement or not, because these initiatives are certainly appropriate even outside of the actual designation. But if a middle school is designated, and especially for their population of students with disabilities, that might be a place where they want to, again, drill down into their data a little bit more and look at not only that student group of students who have disabilities, but are they serving these students with emotional disturbance identifications in the best way that they could? And then again, because school improvement is all about increasing graduation rates, P2G is looking at decreasing dropout rates, because we know we can identify students earlier and earlier as being at risk for dropping out. So we're looking at attendance and student performance. And they might be some indicators that might lead a school to consider path to graduation as a strategy they might want to look at. And then when they're looking at in the planning phase of that cycle of improvement, so once they have dug down and looked at the data and have identified some priority needs, they're going to start writing an action plan. They're going to set some goals for themselves and write an action plan for achieving those goals. And when they're doing that, they're going to start exploring, again, what are those evidence-based strategies and tools that they might want to consider as being appropriate for them. And they're going to see things like Check and Connect specifically that I mentioned earlier. And we have a lot of schools. Check and Connect is growing across the Commonwealth as a really evidence-based support for, again, a larger group of students, but definitely for these middle schoolers who might need that targeted support. So when they're looking at those evidence-based strategies, they're going to come across some of these that we've already incorporated into P2G. So they might want to look at, again, contact their local IU and determine if P2G might be a good match.
So we know that this is kind of targeted at middle schools, but as you had said, these are strategies and evidence-based tools and practices that are certainly relevant to all. And you talked about a couple of triggers that we can think, some indicators that would be a good match when we think about path to graduation or P2G. And that last statement you had just said, I think, is something we do need to highlight. We need to contact our local intermediate units to see if this is a good match for us to see moving forward. So would you recommend that's what schools do if they're listening to this and saying, these indicators seem like they're checking some things off at our school, at our district? Their next step is go to their IU. Is that true?
That is true. So by the end, so this is our third year, our third phase of implementation of P2G. So at this point, all 29 of our intermediate units have been and are involved in the P2G process. So there are intermediate unit TACs who are gaining that same level of professional learning around the strategic instruction models. And then we have our TACs who are engaged in becoming trainers for Check and Connect. And we have, of course, our transition TACs may or may not be involved with P2G, but they're very familiar with the transition discoveries. So there is somebody at the local intermediate unit who is knowledgeable and skilled in all of these practices.
So all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have access to these folks, which I think is a good point to make. So thanks for that. Karen, I'm so glad that you're able to join PaTTANpod to really show the connection between school improvement and path to graduation, or P2G, and the overlapping essence of both of those initiatives with so many other initiatives that we have across Pennsylvania and through the patent and intermediate unit system. So thanks again for joining PaTTANpod today.
Thanks for having me, Dawn.
Thank you to all of you in the field. You are an inspiration to all of us, especially in these times. Special thank you to John Radsdale for producing this podcast. We'll see you next time on PaTTANpod.